Today's guest is Allison Frye, who is a mental health advocate and host of the mental health podcast, Allison in Wonderland. And she's turning her empty nest into an opportunity to focus on her advocacy. For Allison, this journey began with the loss of her brother and mother due to suicide and has become a lifelong obsession for mental health awareness. Allison lives, breathes, and preaches mental health awareness and suicide prevention in all aspects of her life. She's passionate about these causes and will discuss them with anyone that will listen. So, Allison, thank you very much for being on. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I am really honored to be here.
Thank you. I'm happy to dive into all of these things with you, especially even as we spoke before air. There's so many things we align with in terms of how we look at all of this work. So I'm happy to dive into this conversation with you. And what I'd love for you to just start us off with is just, I know I read a lot of, like I read your bio. There's a lot of reasons in there for like it's clear why you are in this work and why you're such a big advocate, but I'd love for you to dive into your story and add anything to what I read for in your bio.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually been in marketing for more than 20 years. I have been married my entire adult life. I have my youngest child is 19, so I'm in that empty nest phase that we talked about, but I kind of fell into marketing and it's very hard to do a career shift. So I received 2 degrees in psychology after losing my brother and then 3 years later, my mother. But still the shift and the transition for job, like when you've got little kids, that's very scary and you need the stability. So I've worked as a mental health advocate and a volunteer for years. And then when my youngest graduated from high school, I was like, okay, I've been saying I was going to do this. I'm going to make good on my promise to myself. So, I do these things, and, suicide prevention is what led me down this path. But I've had an incredible journey of learning about mental health. And I do this really because I feel like at the end of my life, if I can say I saved one person's life or I've had an impact, a positive impact on one person, or at least on more people than I've had a negative impact on, then I can leave knowing that I've done something. And that's really what's led me to this place in my life where I'm still kind of terrified because I'm kind of still doing marketing, but want to go do like mental health advocacy full time. So it's a really interesting dynamic I have in my life right now.
Got it. So it's basically, I guess, just to clarify, so you have like your current job, which is in marketing, with this desire to do the advocacy work, and you're just kind of in that limbo state between the two. Is that accurate?
Right. So like I have the day job and then I have all of the things that I do that also takes about as much time as a day job to work on advocacy, the podcast, I'm writing a book, those things.
Okay, perfect. So given that that's where you're at, how can I best support you today?
I think that I really do suffer with a little bit of imposter syndrome where I think, okay, who am I really to be the one that's speaking as a place of authority for mental health? Part of me is also like, well, everyone should be talking about mental health. But then I get in my head, and the advice we give ourselves is not always the advice we would give other people. And the other part, I think, is really just that fear of leaving this, 20-year marketing career where I've, grown and built up to an executive level and just completely shifting into something else. Am I making the right decision? Is this what I should do? I mean, really, those are like my big hangups. Obviously, I feel like if money was not an issue, I would know that that's okay. But for most of us, money is an issue.
Okay, so tell me a bit more about that. Like, what do you mean? Like, I have imposter syndrome. I don't know if I can make this switch. Making the switch has its own, consequences and whatever. But if money wasn't an issue, I would make the switch. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if I didn't need to draw a salary, because right now, I mean, I've put so much money into the podcast out of my own pocket. It's not like I'm brand new. I'm not monetized. It's one of those things where it's just coming out of my pocket. If I did not need to earn a salary, then even with the holdups that I have with the imposter syndrome, I think I would dive right in and, either, sink or swim. But I do have a little bit of a holdup since I do need to still bring in a salary. And everyone's like, well, how do you make money on the podcast? And really, my goal is to just build my personal brand and then reach people about mental health with the podcast. Making a financial move with that is separate from the podcast. That's after the brand is built and things like that. The book is written.
Okay. So, I mean, tactically, like that sounds like a very good plan, right? Like it's not a plan you can shift into the next 30 days, but like as far as plans go, like that sounds pretty like solid. It makes sense on, okay, well, if I had, if I won the lottery tomorrow, then this is like what I would do. So to me, that signifies there's some very good heart alignment with regards to the actual like direction that you want to be moving into. So to what degree is it about imposter syndrome that like I'm not in some way, shape, or form good enough to like do this? And to what degree is it actually about, well, I just don't have the nest egg to go, 40 hours a week on this. So I guess just with that reflection, like what's landing for you? What is it?
I would say maybe 30% of it is imposter syndrome. It may be more if I had not already, if I do a lot of self work. So I think I've dialed myself back a little bit from where I started this journey a few months ago. But I think with the imposter syndrome, it's not so much about the podcast and it's not so much about the book. It's as I move into the personal brand, I want to do public speaking and be more of a voice for mental health advocacy. And that's where the imposter syndrome comes. So when the day job is not there, and those are the things that are filling up my day, I'm nervous about that. But 70% of why I'm not diving into this like right now is the budgetary reasons of it. It's hard to go and be like, okay, I'm going to volunteer with all of my time and that's all I'm going to do, and live off ramen for the rest of my life and things like that.
Okay. So what does this idea of volunteering and living off of ramen have to do with you getting on stages and public speaking and advocacy?
I think it's about time. So right now I can do the podcast and I can write from home in my own free time. If I do anything outside of my home where I work remotely, then I'm taking time out of a job that then I could lose because I'm not, dedicated to the job at a full-time basis. So that's really where that comes from, because I can't, it's like I have to kind of straddle these two worlds until one of them gives.
Got it. So if from your part-time efforts in building the podcast and the brand and, all of essentially like the business around the brand, like if that was monetized to the degree that it allowed you to quit, then this wouldn't be an issue.
Right. I mean, I would still feel a little guilty for leaving where I'm at because I love the lady that I worked for and stuff. But yes, it would not be an issue as far as that job transition. I've already cut back on my salary. I left being a C-level executive because I couldn't stand the toxic culture. So I've cut back to a job that is less stressful, but is significantly lower. It's just the base amount of what I need to earn, which is also why I have free time to do these things after work, because I'm not working 70 to 90-hour work weeks as an executive anymore.
Okay.
So obviously the money's not a huge concern, but I do have to keep the lights on.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're actually doing it the prudent way. Like I, always say you don't have to burn all the bridges in order to make this transition. So I think that's super like important and great. Um, I guess what I'm more reflecting back on and I'm more curious about is there's like there's this prudent strategy of doing it in kind of stair step order. If I'm going to do it in my part time, I'm going to build up this brand, and like that's all good and great. And then that's in direct conflict with this other idea that, well, like, in order for me to actually like fulfill my dreams, I have to live on ramen and like be broke and not make any money. So what lands for you there? Because I see that you're smiling. So what's landing there?
Yeah, someone told me the other day that they're like, well, you should totally be able to make so much money doing this. And the thing is like, I just need to make a living. In my mind, I don't need to make a ton of money. I need to get my message out. And then, like I said, keep the lights on. So I'm perfectly fine living frugally and all of those things. And cutting back. I've done that a lot since I left my executive position. Um, and of course, it would be great to make a living with something I'm passionate about. I'm not really sure how that happens. Like, I'm not sure if it's that you get paid for public speaking gigs, or maybe my book ends up being a success. I don't know how those things turn into income, but I have no idea. But I know that I want to be able to spend all of my energy focusing on mental health.
Okay. So as a hypothetical, what if for the next year you worked like you're doing right now and you had increasing and compounding impact with your message, with your content, with what you were putting out there, and it made no money, but it had like very real, tangible impact? Would that be an outcome that you would not like?
No, I would love the impact is what I really want. I think that the only hurdle there is that I'm tired because I'm working my day job and I'm doing all of this other stuff. But if I get the message out there and I help just one person, which likely I might not ever know those things, but if I am helping, that is a really great outcome, even if I never make any money off of it, and I'll keep having the day job. I'll just also keep being tired.
Okay. So I think that's actually really important to know clarity wise, because it means that the passion, like if this stays nothing but a passion project for you, you're still all in. And it doesn't have to be the source of your money, on the assumption that your energy levels aren't being threatened in order to do this.
Exactly. I've had a few weeks where I did not launch an episode the day that I said I was going to, and I am super A type, always on schedule. But then I'll post a little social media post. It's like, I am taking a moment to realize that my mental health podcast is not going to damage my mental health. You'll get this tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to keep some clarity on that. But yes, advocacy is my number one goal, and I'm really good at marketing. I can keep doing it. It's what I'm really good at. And I've even found ways to help mental health businesses with my digital marketing skills. So that's kind of a form of advocacy. So I can see where I'm able to put good into the world. I just think that, what is the term, like, you're the best kept secret. I feel like I kind of feel like that sometimes. Like, I have this voice that no one hears. And maybe that's kind of hubris. Like, maybe I'm not really sure. I just think that people need to hear. They need to hear it.
Got it. So then what would you say is the actual problem? Like, is the problem that you're the best kept secret, or is the problem that you can't go full time, or is the problem that your content or your work outside of your day job isn't making money? Like, what's the actual problem?
I would say the first two. I mean, I definitely feel like getting my message out there is probably my biggest problem, because I can't really invest money into it because I've already invested a lot of money into it, and I refuse to give up on it. So it's kind of like this circle, that just this loop this keeps happening where I'm like, I know this is what I'm going to do. I know this is what I meant to do. How do you change careers after 20 years of building up where you're at? Like that's, it's a very difficult mind shift for me.
Okay. And what if it was easy? What would that look like?
I mean, if it was easy, I mean, are meaningful things ever really easy? So,
Okay. So, I mean, if we
um,
pause right there, right? Meaningful things are not easy. Do you think that's a belief that's actually helping you?
I do. I think that when I'm tired and exhausted and have a headache, but 3 podcast episodes to record, or need to write a chapter of my book that is very emotionally draining because it's like re-traumatizing myself as I write it. Um, I do know that it's sometimes, if you're going to make an impact, it is going to be difficult to do that. It's difficult to have a voice that helps people, but you're still not going to get me to shut up. So,
Okay. So, like in that reflection, there's like you're really talking about resiliency. You're talking about your own boundaries and your own self-care, neither of which potentially has anything to do with the lens with which you may hold and look at all of these situations, coming from the belief that meaningful things are never easy.
yeah, I guess so.
Okay. So what's
Yeah.
landing and what isn't with that reflection?
Um, I don't know. I mean, like, it seems like anything that you do that's meaningful is difficult. But I mean, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just in my head. Like it's that head trash, right?
Okay.
That
Well,
it's
so but
that
just if we were
everything's got to be a fight.
okay, so if we were in pause right there, and I'm only interrupting you because like things that you're saying like looks like something to inspect. It's not to like cut you off and
Oh no, it's
not
fine.
have you speak. So meaningful things aren't easy. Everything worthwhile for you have to fight for. Is it not the situations that you're experiencing right now perfectly reflective of those attitudes?
Yeah, they are. I mean, I'm definitely having to fight for these things to make I'm having to probably even have just more of an internal struggle with myself to get myself to do this extra work so that I can put meaningful things out into the world, into the interwebs, into people's minds and hearts.
Right, because meaningful things have to be hard. So if I'm not making it hard, then it's definitely not meaningful.
Yeah, it sounds so much worse that way.
Yeah. It's always funner on this end of the conversation than it is on the other. So I understand
But
that.
if I'm not making it hard, definitely makes it sound worse.
Correct. So I guess the reason why I'm pointing this out to you, because I think it's very meaningful, is so like when you're describing like the tactical situation that you're in, and then when I ask you, okay, so if you have to spend a year being in this situation, only creating impact, you'd be like, yeah, that'd be like a pretty great outcome. And yeah, I'd have to check myself to not burn out, which makes sense regardless of whether you're full-time in this or not. So I'm like, okay, so I want advocacy. I have no issues with the situation that I'm in, apart from that there's things to juggle, but like I'm okay because it's worth it. So I'm like, to me, it's like, this seems like a pretty good path for you to go forward without the frenzy of having to burn your bridges and then figure out how you're going to like pay for your next meal. And yet, whenever I like prompt that, there's always this yes, but, right? I.e., if the lens that I hold as meaningful things aren't easy, I have to fight for things that are worthwhile. It's like, if the easy thing in front of me is actually what I'm doing, I can't accept that if meaningful things have to be hard. So it's like I have to manufacture my own inner friction to verify that. So, well, what's landing for you from that?
Yeah, it just sounds like everything I've ever done in my whole life. I think maybe it is just past experiences, knowing that the harder things I've gone through have been the most meaningful. So there's probably a correlation in my brain that it's not a meaningful thing that I'm doing if it's not at some detriment to myself. And you mentioned self-care. I am the worst about self-care. I absolutely do not practice what I preach there, because once again, like I'm one of those people that would starve for a month to feed somebody else, just because it would be harder for me emotionally to do it the other way. Like I just couldn't.
Right. So now, again, even that, like self-care is so hard for me. Why? Because that would actually make things easier. So,
It's just time. Every time I do something for myself, I have to rationalize the time that I'm taking away from something else. I'm going tomorrow to get a massage. I live in the middle of nowhere, so it's a 2-hour drive there, a 90-minute massage, a 2-hour drive back. 3 times this week, I've almost canceled the appointment because of all of the other things that I could do in like half of a day
mhm.
that day. So it's as if self-care is me, it's me like selfishly taking away from these other things that I should be doing. Logically,
Right.
I know that doesn't make sense. As a mental health advocate, I do not suggest that at
Right.
all.
But emotionally, there's a strong pull to it.
Right. Right.
So if you did take unapologetic self-care, what does that mean about you?
It probably means that I would be less likely to burn out, and I could
Right. Well, that's what the consequence of it
be.
would be. But what does it mean about you if you were unapologetic about your self-care?
Well, I mean, like I know that it doesn't mean that I'm selfish. I guess what it would mean about me is that I really don't know. I mean, because it's if I could do those things unapologetically, I would already be doing them.
Okay. Which that's fair. So I understand you know this
So
intellectually. So if you tune in, like, what's the feeling? Like, if you imagine yourself unapologetically doing self-care, what's the feeling?
it feels selfish.
It feels selfish. Okay. So selfish, if we just assume as a state, what's the actual feeling?
Guilt.
Okay. So what are you guilty about?
Taking time and energy that could be put into something meaningful for someone else and putting it into myself.
Okay.
Taking time away from family, whatever, putting it into myself.
Fair. So again, that's like the implications of the guilt. To get away from the guilt is why you believe those things. But if we assume that guilt is a covering emotion, it's covering something up. So what's it covering about your selfishness?
Um, I feel like my self-worth is very closely tied to my impact on helping other people. My entire life, I grew up in a home with mental illness. I took care of my siblings. I got married at 18 to a man, adopted his 1-year-old baby. Like my whole life, I've taken care of everybody. And I feel like that makes me probably feel like I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to do. Like it's my job to take care of everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and if I'm not doing that because I'm taking care of myself, then I'm not being true to what I'm supposed to be doing, what like my role in this world is to take care of everyone else.
Right. So my identity is one where both my worth and my significance is directly tied to taking care of everyone and everybody else. So if I go against that by being selfish in many ways, that also means I'm a bad person.
Right.
Okay.
Which sounds ridiculous when you say it.
These things always do when reflected back. So I acknowledge you for allowing yourself to be witnessed in exploring it, because at the end of the day, then so much of like meaningful things aren't easy. I have to fight for things that are worthwhile. Basically, I have patterns of making things hard. I have to make things hard, especially if it involves other people, because the harder I work, the more it shows that I'm taking care of everybody else, the more goodness I can experience, the more worth I get to experience.
Yes, that that is what I said.
Okay. So what's landing for you from that reflection?
I think that it's it's not super healthy to have your self-worth so strongly tied to everyone else, because you can fail people no matter how hard you work. So in reflecting on that, I can see how I've spiraled when relationships that I've tried really hard, like friendships and family and things, I've tried so hard to be the one taking care of everyone, and they still turn out negatively. And it's a negative mental health repercussion for me. Um, so really trying to have my self-worth tied to what I can do for other people so closely, I can see that going so wrong.
Yep. And if you now zoom out, how is that creating problems for the business that you want to create?
I mean, I'm definitely for the business that I want to create, I'm trying so hard to not offend anyone when I talk.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually kind of, well, because I want everyone to get the mental health message. So I really dance around a lot of things that I don't, because I don't want half the audience to decide they don't want to be the audience. And so while I am the most, I pride myself on being the most open person in the world about my personal mental health. When it comes to other things, I am very careful with my words, because I don't want my message, I don't want to alienate half of the people if we've got something important for them to hear. So it does slightly interfere with my goal of being 100% my authentic self.
Mm-hmm. So in that instance, are you actually optimizing for your message and your impact and who it's meant to hear and the depth that they're meant to hear it? Or are you optimizing for protecting your own wounding on what it means if you upset other people?
I think it's more about, I really think that it's more about wanting to get the message out to more people, because I've thought about this a lot. I'm going to piss off people with in my life with my book. It's going to happen. You write a memoir, if you've got enough stuff to make one, there's probably skeletons that people don't want out of the closet. But if I wanted to go in a direction where I'm like very much towards one political angle or one religious angle and really taking a stand on things, then I would accept the fact that I'm going to have this specific audience, and half of the world or half of the country or half of whoever listens to a mental health podcast, they're going to just not be the ones that are my viewership. So I could accept that if that was like the conscious decision that I make. But right now, the general idea is that I want to talk about every single thing having to do with mental health. And someone's not going to hear the message that they should if I alienate half of the people of the world.
Mm-hmm. So, A, do you know that that's true?
I mean, it seems pretty true. Everybody's, I mean, just America is divided like 50% on everything. So it seems like I could say anything and immediately lose half of the people. So
Okay.
I mean, like
So,
it seems
but
like a
you,
very true statement about Americans, at least.
it does. And like, I understand like you're operating in the cultural thing that you're
Right.
operating in, so it makes sense, and I understand it intellectually 100%. But what I'm getting at is, like, do you actually have any real world data that applies to you?
Oh no, I don't have any real world data that approve.
Okay,
Like,
so
I
as
mean,
far
like
as
I
like,
have lived experience where if I tell someone a political belief that it will piss off half the people, which is why I don't say those things on Facebook, because half of the people on there are one way and half of them are the other. So I just don't. I have lived experience where those things online within just my inner circle of people has created that divide. And so I guess I'm just kind of expanding that to a, I guess, national level.
right, and that's fair. So this isn't necessarily about what needs to go in your messaging or doesn't, because it's your messaging, you get to decide it. It's more, where are you at peace, and what is actually the most honest expression of what you actually want to say. Because right now it sounds like there is more you want to say, but you're filtering it for something that is unsubstantiated with real world data. And you also don't have like real world proof that that is a bad thing. Like, if you alienate 50%, but the other 50% now perk up and listen deeper, is that also a bad outcome?
No, I guess if I got 50% of the people in the country to engage at a deeper level than 100%, that would probably actually be a better outcome.
Right. It's
Problem
like,
is I'm very independent in a lot of my views, which means I'm likely to piss off more than 50% because on one issue I'm one way, on the other issue I'm another.
right. And
I try to have
earlier,
common sense with it.
yeah. And listen, so like, I guess what I'm getting at is, like, when we started this whole conversation and I asked you about impact, and you were like, yeah, if my stuff just impacts like one person, I'll be satisfied.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's the standard through which you're willing to do this work, it's like, well, let me dilute my message so 100 people can listen to it lukewarmly, instead of allowing 30 to listen to it with full depth and potentially actually change something in their life.
Okay, but let me throw that back at you. Okay. So if I say something that is controversial or not worded in the perfect way, and I positively impact one person and their mental health, but negatively impact one person and their mental health, does that count as me positively impacting someone? Or does
That's
the
up to you
karma
to
cross its
decide.
out? It seems like I want to make sure that my words aren't hurting people.
Right. Which makes sense because of the work that you're in. And do you control other people's reactions?
Oh, absolutely not. If I did, my life would be very different.
Yeah, if all of us could just give a manual to other people so they would know how to act, so we would be okay, it would be a wonderful world, right? Like, I get it. So if, like, what does it mean for you to negatively impact somebody else? They get upset, they get triggered. Like, well, what does that mean?
I mean, I think triggers would be a problem. I think that it's, I don't even know. Like, if they gave up on therapy and they needed to go to therapy, or if they completely blew up their life because I'm sitting here talking about lived experiences that I'm okay with it blowing up certain relationships in my life. And then they think, well, they need to go do that. And it blows up their life. How, like, I mean, I've spent 20 years in therapy getting to this point. Like, it's a whole process that I've gone through to get there. And I don't want someone's life to feel worse. I want everyone to feel like they have a place to have a voice and they can relate to people. And I guess, I don't know, just feel like their mental health care is important and the mental health care of the people around them is important.
And who gets to decide that? Them or you for them?
I guess them. I can decide what I say. And I do leave a lot of the conversation up to my guests. But I definitely am very careful with the words that I put out there. So, I mean, it really, everything's about the way people intake it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Which you
it's,
also don't control.
I also don't control. I could say something that is the most neutral thing in the world, and there still be people that take it the wrong way. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
anyone that's ever gotten in an email war with someone at work knows when like their message was perfectly fine, they realize that like you can mean any something with the best intentions and people still take it wrong. So I mean, I definitely can't control the way other people, respond. I also feel like because I'm in digital marketing and I'm very data driven, once I get the data of who I'm actually reaching, it will be easier for me to see who I'm connecting with and who's benefiting and how to cater the message and be able to actually be more my authentic self for those people.
Okay. So again, right, like you have a path towards what it is that you want. So then going back to kind of the original sentiment, like what's the actual problem?
I mean, it's still the actual problem, I guess. I mean, I have the path. It's just, there's lots of paths in front of us. How do we get from point A to point B? How do we not get lost? How do we know we're on the right path? I mean, it's like there's a scarecrow going like it's this way or it's this way, and you just have to figure it out. So I guess I'm scared. It's a scary
Right.
journey.
So
I
that,
got a lot of fear of pissing people off, fear of
yeah,
making the wrong decision, fear of blowing up my career I've worked 20 years for. Yeah. So I'm scared.
right. So then do you really have a tactical messaging problem or do you actually have a courage problem?
I think it could be a courage problem. I come off very confident, but I think that back to kind of the imposter syndrome idea of it is me being scared that I'm really not good enough to be doing these things or that I'm just making the wrong decision. How do you know? It's like changing jobs. You may be leaving one toxic place for the more toxic place. So it's, you know, the anxiety of trying to make the right decision and knowing that you're on the right path.
Right. So basically, I want
So
to
now
step
I'm,
into,
yeah, now I'm not standing in front of the scarecrow. Now I'm the cowardly lion.
right.
Gonna
Which,
keep going. We're just gonna keep going down this yellow brick road.
yeah, which, listen, like at the end of the day, welcome to the world that you are willing to explore. It just really comes back to is looking for certainty in the uncertainty of your path actually going to help you, or is building your courage and self-trust muscles the thing that are actually going to help you?
Probably building my courage and self-trust, but then we go back to is that selfish because it's self-care?
Right. So if you're going to go to the root of the problem, all roads for you lead back to the seeming unworthiness you have to put yourself first, whether that's for advocacy, building your own courage, building your own self trust, actually like owning what it is that you want and accepting that you have needs and you have wants and you can actually go forth and meet them, and being okay with actually saying what's on your heart regardless of other people's thing. The linchpin of all of those is this sense of unworthiness, or rather maybe significance. Like my main source of worthiness and significance is other people, other people's opinions, helping other people. It's never my own.
Right. If it was just me in the world, where would my self-worth come from?
Correct. So if you can solve for that, it makes the others a whole lot easier.
Yeah. But it's hard to take all of those other people out of the equation.
Well, it's hard because you're
I
unwilling to
like
let it go.
mental. Yeah, that's probably true.
Right.
But I have taken care of so many people in my life. I know that there are people that are better off today because I've helped in some way or another.
And that is true, but who have you not taken care of?
Me.
Right. So it is true there's a lot of people that are better off, except the one person that's actually needed it the whole time.
Yeah. Can I claim that childhood mental illness home thing again?
You can, like, there's good reasons why you are the way that you are, and those pieces are never to be discounted, and they're very valid for bringing you here. And you've had actually a lot of gifts that have garnered from that. Like, to do what you do in the capacity that you have can only be gotten from the history that you've had. So this is not about discounting that. It's about, if the next level of my own evolution and expression requires me to actually address the elephant in the room that I've carried from my whole childhood into my adulthood, then that's the decision you get to make. Is, do I address that so I can live my mission? That's the only decision. Like, that decision only you can make.
it it seems like it seems like the answer is yes. Yes, I do it. Like that it took me a lot of time to get to the point where I was like, yes, I'm going to publish my memoir. I know it's going to burn bridges. So it was like a process, but it does seem like it's kind of that same process where I know yes is the answer and I need to get there, but then I have to like mentally and emotionally kind of like do the work to figure out how to get there and be okay if I burn the bridges, if I blow up a relationship.
Right. And if you just rewind what we just went through, right? Everything that you were like shaking your head at and nodding on my reflections, which were about, like, are you basically ready to take ownership of your own self-worth? The immediate place your brain went to was, well, I'm gonna have to burn bridges with a lot of other people, and a lot of other people are gonna be like literally the exact same pattern that kind of got you into this place. Like, it's so default that even when speaking about your own empowerment to step into this, your brain's automatically going to, well, who does this impact? If I get better, who gets worse? If I get better, who's that going to affect? Will it trigger anybody else? The exact opposite of the quality that you are wanting to step into.
But so it's the exact opposite of what I need for me. But then we go back to, is it selfish to not consider those people if I make changes?
It's not selfish for you to make self-honoring choices, and it's not selfish to let other people have their own experience.
I like that. Self-honoring choices. I wrote it down.
That's the part that's missing, right? The honoring of your own needs, the honoring of where you want to go, the honoring of where you want to take your life, the honoring of what you want it to look like, the honoring of what you want to express. All of that you can label, sure, as selfish. But the way that we use the word selfish is usually to connote, if I get something, you lose something. Yet everything that you're describing and what really wants to emerge from you is all about your own well-being. The fact that that impacts other people, you could easily make the argument that it impacts them in a negative way because they've become so dependent on you not honoring yourself and giving yourself up to other people, i.e., in many ways, enabling their lesser patterns as well.
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely a doormat in some of my relationships.
100%, which is always the case with people that have this particular pattern, right? So any way you
Right.
split it, it always comes back to you, and really allowing and respecting the fact that other people get to have their experience, even if it's angry, even if it's lashing out, even if it's, seemingly conflicting with yours, it's also their experience. And by you shunning yourself down, you actually deny them of their own full experience, because you're just molding to whatever pattern it is that they have.
Right. Well, it makes perfect sense. And
So,
yeah, so I mean, I've always known that self-care was what I was really terrible at, but I think that the terminology self-honoring choices for some reason resonates with me so much better than self-care. Um, Self-care can mean so many things, but honoring my true self doesn't sound as selfish as like going and getting a massage.
right.
Sounds
But it's also like, okay, so even if it's getting a
kind of the same
massage,
thing.
it's like, how, like you getting a massage, how does that hurt anybody? It actually puts money into somebody else's pocket.
Oh, good point. And I have to fill my tank up and I have to see I'm helping the economy.
Ripple effects of that I even didn't even think of, but like literally, how does you getting a massage hurt anybody?
Probably not at all, but it makes my shoulder feel better.
Right, probably because you're letting go of some of the emotional guilt around doing something simple like getting a massage.
Yeah. So basically, my holdup is that I'm scared of taking care of myself and actually being my 100% authentic self that I so proudly claim to be.
So I couldn't have summarized it better. So yeah, that's 110%. If I have to summarize everything, that would be the way to do it. So
Told you
kudos
I
to you.
take notes.
Yeah, no, you did great. So yeah, I mean, I know that's a lot to unpack and obviously to work through to eliminate, and it's kind of beyond the scope of this conversation. But as far as mapping this out, like, does that feel complete for you? Is there still something left outstanding?
No, it feels complete. It's interesting coming into it and thinking, well, these are my hangups, and it being like, no, your hangups are not imposter syndrome. I think it's probably the opposite. It seems like I feel like I'm so important that I need to take care of everybody. That's like the opposite of imposter syndrome.
Yep.
And no, it's not the hangups of the job, because even if I don't make money on this, I can still sustain life the way that I'm going now if I'm still helping people. So it's interesting coming into it thinking these are what my issues are, and leaving with completely different takeaways.
110%. So I'm glad that that's landing for you. So I'm happy for that. So why don't you just close us off and let everybody know where to find you, who's the best person to find you? Floor is yours for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Allison Frye, and I am the host of the Allison in Wonderland mental health podcast. You can find me at allisoninwonderland.com. I'm also on all of these social channels, which you can link to from allisoninwonderland.com. If you go to my website and sign up for my email list, you will get a free guide to psychological first aid. So if you know how to do the Heimlich maneuver, you should also know psychological first aid.
I love that. So yeah, as always, we'll include that in the show notes. But Allison, thank you very much for being on, and for everybody else listening, we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for having me.